So far, everything we have been building has been in a single queue list. EOS has the ability to store many queue lists, which can be used for specialty linear playback, effects queue lists, and multi-programmer environments. When the same channels are stored in multiple queue lists, the software needs to know who owns a channel at any given time. By default, queue lists are LTP, or latest takes precedence. That means that whichever queue list has given a channel its most recent move instruction owns that channel. That queue list will remain the owner of that channel until another queue list acts upon it with a move instruction, or until the current owner releases it. Let's take a look at some examples of using a multi-queue list environment. The first thing we want to do is record a new queue list. So I'm going to make sure that I am in snapshot 4 and that I'm in live. Get there if you're not. I'm going to go ahead and go to queue 102, enter. Take me to that part of the show. I want to make some changes, so I'm going to grab my front of house movers and just home them. And also, some of them are still in palettes, so I'm going to go ahead and make them absolute as well, just to break those references. And I actually want them pointed at my guitar focus palette, so I'll put them right there. So now I'm ready to record my first queue of my new list. Select last, which will grab just those channels. Record 2/1, enter. 2/1 indicates that I'm recording into queue list 2, Q1, and you'll notice a few things change. The first thing you'll notice is that on my first available fader, queue list 2 will automatically map itself. So new queue lists will find the first empty fader and put themselves there. You can move them around later. And you'll notice on my motorized fader hardware, that fader moves up to the top. If you're on non-motorized hardware, your bump button will be blinking at you, and you'll want to move that fader up because a queue list needs its fader in the full position in order to play back. The other thing you'll notice is that my playback status display is now looking at queue list 2, and in a few, we'll look at how to control that. So we're going to go ahead and add a few more queues to this list. I'm going to say select last and put those at the singer position. I'm going to go ahead and say record only, which as we know will just grab my manual information. 2, enter. And because my queue list 2 is at the header of my command line, you'll notice that it assumes that I'm recording into queue list 2. If I wanted to record this data into another queue list, I would have to specify that queue list. And for good times, let's go ahead and say select last, move those over to my drums, and record only, next, enter. And you can see that that puts queue 2/3 on the command line for me. And so we're not waiting all day on our examples. Queue 1 through 3, time 1, enter. Just like we can play back our queue list 1 on our main fader pair, we can play back our queue list 2 over on our faders. Don't forget that you need your fader to be in the full position, so if you're on non-motorized hardware, go ahead and slide that up to the top. And just like on our master fader pair, the top button is back for that queue list, so we can hit back. We can hit go, which is our bottom button. And if we want to go to a specific queue, because we have multiple queue lists now, we need to tell the board which queue list we want to go to which queue. So if I say go to queue 2/1, that's going to send queue list 2 back to its queue 1. And you'll notice that my queue list 1 remains unaffected. If I want to remove the contributing content of a queue list, one of the ways I can do that is send that queue list to queue 0. So go to queue 2/0. We'll just send those values that that queue list owns back to their 0 position. Before we brought queue list 2 on stage and it took ownership of those channels, queue list 1 had values for them, and so if I want to bring those values back on stage, I just have to play the current queue on stage again. So go to queue 1/102, we'll replay that queue and bring my channels back into queue list 1.